The Shawshank Redemption. Labeled as not one of, but labeled the greatest movie of all time. The #1 movie on IMDb. But I just watched it for the first time a few days ago, and I went into it knowing nothing about it. I knew it was about a guy who got convicted for supposedly murdering his wife, and that's all. And Morgan Freeman. Now, this video might definitely be extensive, but I want to see, in my personal opinion, if this movie holds up for that title of the greatest movie of all time. Because again, I have no bias towards it. I watched it like 30 years late. Like literally 30 years late. I know nothing about it, so I went in completely blind. The only thing going into it is knowing about the title that this movie has. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is just my opinion, so of course, whether I say I like it, whether I don't like it, it's completely fine. It's still definitely a timeless classic. So sit back and enjoy my little discussion about this movie.
I'll get busy dying. That's damn right.
So as we all know, this movie is, I didn't know going into this movie. I didn't even know what the main guy's name was. I had context clues about what this movie could be, and I will get into that at the end of this video because I had a totally different idea of what this movie was going to be like versus what it was actually like. Like, I did not know who Andy was. I didn't know that name. I didn't know his name was Andy. I had a feeling it was going to be about the guy who's on the movie poster, because I know that ain't Morgan Freeman. That's the only context clues I put together myself. And I could have sworn the actor, I think his name is Tim Robbins, I could have sworn the actor who plays Andy was young Tom Hanks. like he looks like a mixture of young Tom Hanks and young Matthew Perry. Fun fact, I heard that Tom Hanks was actually originally supposed to be playing Andy Dufresne, but he was busy filming Forrest Gump.
Life was like a box of chocolates.
Basically, Andy is convicted of two life sentences for killing his wife and his wife's lover. Which, newsflash, he never committed. Damn. And honestly, I never got the concept of like 2 life sentences. Like, you're already there for life. What's the point of adding 2 life sentences to that? Just to prove a point, I guess. So Andy is sent to Shawshank Prison. This is where we meet the character Red, who is of course played by Morgan Freeman. Why is he called Red, you may ask? Nobody knows. Even he doesn't know. Okay, so I did some research as to like why, because the whole scene where Andy asks why his name is Red or his nickname is Red always struck me as weird because it felt kind of like an inside joke or something, and apparently it is. So as we all know, this movie is based off of a Stephen King novel, which is where his nickname comes from, Red. But in the movie, Andy asked Red why his nickname is Red, and then Red just basically says maybe it's because he's Irish. He didn't even sound too sure.
Red. Name's Red.
Red. Why do they call you that?
Maybe it's because I'm Irish.
I won't lie, when he said that his name was Red, or his nickname was Red, I thought it was because he killed so many people, and it's like blood, like red blood. Yeah. But yes, Red is another convict who was convicted of killing his wife and 2 other people in a car crash. But he cut the brakes on her brakes. And he is serving a life sentence. But this far in the movie, he has only served 20 years. I mean, I shouldn't say only. That's like my entire life, so he served 20 years. The first time we see him is in a parole hearing, seeing if he's eligible for parole, which he does get denied from. Fun fact, when we see Red's mugshot, that was actually a picture of Morgan Freeman's son. We actually do see Morgan Freeman's son for a split second, like early in the movie, as well as another convict. The more you know. So first time watching this movie, I was genuinely like surprised by how different the characters were than I initially thought. Like, I did believe that Red was supposed to be like, an older felon from prison. But I thought he was supposed to be like this, like, old wise guy that everyone goes to for advice. But honestly, he really wasn't. He was still learning like the rest of them, which I would definitely get to later. I should also probably mention Officer Hardley, who is played by Clancy Brown. Yeah, to all my SpongeBob fanatics, that's the voice of Mr. Krabs. He was also in like 2 episodes of Lost, for the people who watched Lost. So right away, Red thinks that Andy is like this snuck-up, snobby, sensitive rich boy. So when it's everyone's first night, he put a bet on the other prisoners, thinking that Andy would be the first one to crack when lights go out.
I must admit I didn't think much of Andy first time I laid eyes on him. Looked like a stiff breeze would blow him over. That was my first impression of the man.
But he was pleasantly surprised seeing that Andy was the only one who did not make a sound, making Red earn some respect for Andy, and then they later become friends. The characters we also meet in like one of the first scenes is he's the Warden Norton. Yeah, it rhymes. I get confused. He is pretty brutal, and he uses religion as an excuse to, like, kill people. I shouldn't say kill people, but yeah, he instructs people to hurt people because it's in the name of the Lord, and he's trying to correct them of their sins.
Put your trust in the Lord. Your ass belongs to me. Welcome to Shawshank.
We also meet a bunch of people in the prison. They're called the Sister Gang, who I thought was like a bunch of gay guys who are actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on YouTube, but like R-wordist, who definitely have an eye out for Andy. I mean, look at this man. Of course, not condoning their actions in the slightest. They are vile, evil people. But apparently they're not even, like, gay. Like, this is just, like, they're just sick people, and this is, like, their torture technique.
I don't suppose it would help any if I explained to them I'm not homosexual.
Neither are they. You have to be human first. They don't qualify.
But apparently the Sister Gang has been assaulting, like, since Andy got to the prison, basically have been R-wording him and assaulting him for about 2 years. Until Hadley beat up, like, legit beat up the main guy, his name is Boggs, beat him up so severely to the point where he completely gets paralyzed and he's transferred to a different prison. Like, he can never walk again. And apparently to Red's voiceover, because Morgan Freeman voiceovers this entire movie from his point of view. Basically, he talks about how for the rest of his life he has to eat food through a straw. Like, damn.
2 things never happened again after that. The sisters never laid a finger on Andy again. And Boggs never walked again.
So as the time goes on, everything starts to kind of get a little bit confusing. And I won't spend, like, an insane amount of time on this, even though it is kind of a big part of the movie, but it is really complex. Basically, Andy was a banker before he got arrested, and his whole thing was like all these really good money, all that kind of stuff. So he kind of gave the warden and Officer Hadley kind of an idea on how to launder money, which is what they've been doing this entire movie, and the main reason why they're so protective of Andy. Like, they're protected of him, and they do not want him to get killed or anything. So that's the reason why Hadley beat Boggs, like, senseless, because of the things he had been doing to Andy. So it's been about 2.5 years at this point, I would say, and this is where we really meet the character Brooks. To anyone who's seen this movie before, that name probably gives you PTSD. And if you haven't got a PTSD attack already, you will soon, trust me. But we first meet him in the cafeteria when Andy finds a maggot in his food, and Brooks is also harvesting a baby crow that he found in the courtyard, who is honestly kind of one of the best characters in the movie. So Brooks is an elderly man who has been at Shawshank Prison for about 50 years, and he's also the prison's librarian. If you're curious as to what he's done to be in prison for that long, well, stay curious. Okay, I'm just kidding. I was curious myself, so I did a little bit of research. And thank you, Stephen King, for putting this in your book. So, There really isn't any details about what he did, but all we know is the basic idea. Yeah, he killed his wife and his daughter. Yeah. Why did all these people kill their wives? Like freaking Red, Brooks, kind of Andy. So Andy gets a job at the library as time goes on. So as the days pass, more and more people learn to love and respect Andy, mainly for his kindness and his undeniable sense of hope. He even tries to fund money from the government in order to kind of expand the library. Now, here comes the saddest, or one of the saddest parts of the movie, that people personally skip when watching this. But yes, that's right, it is Brooke's fate. So basically the gang finds Brooke basically putting a knife to the throat of one of the convicts, threatening to kill him. And he does this because he is having a crisis after finding out that he is eligible for parole and that he's getting out of jail.
Brooks, look at his neck. He's bleeding.
It's the only way they let me stay.
Because he genuinely does not know if he could survive outside of prison.
Crazy old fool goddamn near cut my throat.
Oh, shit, Haywood, you've had worse than shaving.
So yeah, I'm definitely going to be giving a trigger warning for this next part. So if you're triggered by... yeah, just be aware. So we see Brooks leave the prison and he writes Andy and Red a letter, basically telling him how life outside is for him, since he hasn't seen outside the prison walls in 50 years.
The world went and got itself in a big damn hurry.
He gets a small apartment and a job at the grocery store. But unfortunately, it all ends up being much too much. So unfortunately, not even trying to be funny, I just can't talk. But unfortunately, it ends up being way too much for him. So he goes to his apartment and then he carves "Brooks was here" on the wall, and right underneath is where he ends his life. I won't lie, unfortunately, when I watched this for the first time, I knew where this was going. Like, ever since we saw he was being released, I knew it wasn't going to end good. But they did a really good job at showing institutionalization syndrome. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but they did a really good at showcasing it for Brooks' case. Luckily, I got that scene out of the way because it definitely was a sad one. And, yeah, there's a scene that happens again at the end of, well, not at the end, but later on in this movie, which is also very sad, but honey, we'll get there. I feel like the next scene is one of the most iconic scenes from this movie, and maybe in all pop culture. It's where Andy plays classical music on a record player, and then he showcases it to the entire prison. And the warden even threatens to put him into solitary confinement, but Andy simply just turns up the volume, which is such a badass move.
I am warning you, Dufresne, turn that off!
So when watching this for the first time, well, again, I only seen it once, but when watching this, I honestly did not really understand the symbolism for that scene. Like, I didn't really understand his motive for doing that. But according to, the internet, it basically just symbolizes his rebellion. It's also to show the prisoners the sense of hope. But during Red's voiceover for that part, he admits that he did not know what the singer was singing about because it wasn't Italian, but he definitely had a feeling that it was very hopeful and beautiful. But because of that little stunt, Andy is sent to solitary confinement. So we cut to 2 weeks later, and that is when Andy is finally done with solitary confinement, and he is now out and about, and he almost basically says that it was kind of worth it.
Was it worth it? 2 weeks in the hole?
Easiest time I ever did.
Oh, shit. There's no such thing as easy time in the hole.
That's right, a week in the hole is like a year. Damn straight.
This is the first time he really mentions the whole sense of hope thing, and we see that Red gets kind of defensive about this whole thing, basically saying that hope is pointless behind prison walls.
Let me tell you something, my friend. Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. It's got no use on the inside. You better get used to that idea.
Like Brooks did.
And yes, this scene definitely becomes important later on. So the next scene, we learn that it has officially been 30 years since Red has been locked up. So this has been 10 years since the beginning of the movie, and 10 years since Andy has been arrested. So I mentioned before that Andy was trying to find a way to redesign the library, which he ended up successfully doing. So they definitely got a bunch of new books set in. And I didn't do any research for this part, but there's a scene where a bunch of inmates are like reading the titles of books, and like the dumb one of the group keeps like mispronouncing the names of the books, making the other inmates scold him. Yet it made Red generally laugh. And I don't know why, but it almost looks like Morgan Freeman kind of broke character at that point.
Count Monte Cristo.
That's Cristo, you dumb shit.
By Alexandre Dumas.
Like, his laugh was way too genuine. So they named the library after Brooks. Does this yodeling scene give you flashbacks, like, to anyone else, or is it just me?
Lord don't know what to do. All I do is sit inside.
Lord, I don't know what to do. All I do is sit inside. Oh, Lord, that.
Well, back to 2016. So now we get introduced to a new prisoner named Tommy. He is kind of like this 1950s greaser kind of guy. He's cocky, loud, but he's a chill dude and everyone likes him.
Hey, come on, old boys! Move it like molasses! Making me look bad!
We liked him immediately.
So Tommy has a wife and a young baby. So he also has been in and out of jail since he was like 13. But he wants to basically start a new leave since he's only been sentenced for 2 years in jail. So during that time, he's studying for his GED test with the help of Andy. So I'm not exactly sure how long this sentence was. This time lapse was from when he decided to take the GED test to when he actually did take it. Probably at least a few months. I'm really not 100% sure on that. But basically, yes, we see him taking his GED test and then he basically throws a fit because it's way too hard. Very relatable.
Let's see how the score comes out.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how the goddamn score comes out.
2 points right there. There's your goddamn score. Fuck this place! Fuck it!
For some reason, the transition from that scene to the next scene is like weirdly hilarious. We see him like screaming at the top of his lungs about how much he hates this. And then we see him just casually talking to Red in the next scene.
Feel bad. Let him down.
He's just like, yeah, I feel bad for screaming.
Fuck this place! Fuck it!
Feel bad. Let him down.
So this is why the character Tommy was even put in this movie in the first place and why his character is so important. Because I do know that his presence does definitely seem random. Like, when I watched it, I was like, where is this case going? Like, I thought introducing a new prisoner this late was kind of weird, but it was for a good reason. So Red tells Tommy about Andy's story about why he's locked up here. And this made Tommy remember a story that his old cellmate at a different prison told him. His name was Elmo Blouch, who basically always bragged about his crimes. But he remembered Elmo telling him a story about how he killed this girl and her lover, and the hotshot banker got framed for it.
Some hotshot banker. And he's the one they pinned it on.
This made Andy go to the warden and basically tell him that he has a testimony now and hopefully they could kind of redo his whole trial. Now my question is, how did Tommy put all of this together? Like, Red didn't even mention that Andy was falsely imprisoned. Like, I don't even think Red even knew that he was falsely imprisoned until much later in the movie. And there's probably a lot of cases similar to this. I don't know. I guess he's smarter than people put on. So Andy... So the warden basically says, like, no way, Jose. And then Andy basically calls him obtuse.
How can you be so obtuse?
Did you call me obtuse?
Which makes him very angry, because it's basically him like subtly insulting him by saying that he is like unaware of what's happening in his jail, and basically that he's blind to Andy's potential innocence, challenging the authority of the prison, which, as we can tell, the warden takes very seriously. Because of all this, Andy is forced to be in solitary confinement for a month, which is apparently the longest like anyone has ever been in solitary confinement that any of the prisoners have heard of.
Solitary, a month.
Yes, sir. What's the matter with you?
Get him out of here.
This is my chance to get out. Don't you see that? It's my life. Don't you understand? It's my life.
Get him out. Get him out!
So in the next scene, we actually see that Tommy did pass the GED test. And even an officer tells Andy while he's still in the hole.
The kid passed. C+ average. Thought you'd like to know.
Oh god, this next scene freaking pisses me off. So the warden asks to speak to Tommy alone, ask him if what he told Andy was actually true, and asking him if he was willing to even testify for Andy in court. To which Andy said that he will happily do so. And then, this happens. Like, I knew it was coming. When he asked to see him outside, alone, in the dark, and offering him a cigarette. Come on. Come on. He had a family, a baby. He passed his GED test. He was finally turning his life around. This hurts. Like, Brooks hurt, but him? It hurts more. It hurts way worse. I'm not gonna lie, it hurt worse. So if you're curious why, the warden killed Tommy for official reasons, yeah, he basically does not want Andy to leave because Andy is useful to him now. And also because Andy is a smart guy and he knew about the warden's money laundering scheme. So the warden visits Andy in the hole and basically threatens to, destroy his library, strip Andy of guard protection, and transfer him to harsher conditions.
Catching my drift? Or am I being obtuse?
And then he sentenced him to another month in solitary confinement. Like, damn. Damn. I was shocked when I saw that. So a very disheveled Andy finally comes out of solitary confinement after 2 months. He tells a very skeptical Red about his dreams of living in Mexico, where he could hopefully start anew. So he basically asked Red to promise, if he ever got out of prison, to travel to this specific hayfield in Baxton and recover a package that Andy has left there.
Promise me, Red. If you ever get out, find that spot. There's something buried under it I want you to have.
What, Andy? What's buried under there?
You'll have to pry it up to see.
So after this whole talk, Red was kind of concerned for Andy because he's been acting weird, but also because he is worried that he's suicidal. Also, mainly because he asked to borrow a rope for one of the inmates. So night comes, and then Red is worried for the entire night.
That was the longest night of my life.
But then it's roll call in the morning and they find out that Andy is not there. So the warden questions Red about this since he knows that the two are friends. But when Red says that he knows nothing about the matter, the warden gets angry and then he throws one of Andy's rocks at a poster on the wall. And then the poster is basically translucent. He puts his hand through it and then sees that there is a big ass hole carved into the cement. A hole that took almost 20 years to carve. In the year 1966, Andy Dufresne has escaped from Shawshank Prison. Now we're getting to my favorite part of the movie. We finally get to see Andy's point of view for when he escaped. So we see a flashback of Andy figuring out how kind of soft the wall is so he's able to cut through it. Finally, it's the night where Andy decides that enough is enough and he is going to leave. So he packed up his things and then he crawled out of the wall. My claustrophobia could never. So he makes it to the pipelines and then very cleverly he waits for a crack of thunder to erupt in order for him to break the pipe. He crawls through 500 yards through literal shit for 500 yards at the length of 5 football fields. So you could almost feel the relief Andy feels when he makes it to the other side. Such a good scene. So my question is, probably a dumb question. How did he manage to carve so deep into the wall without a guard noticing? The first part makes sense. We kind of see him doing it from underneath the poster and all. But after a while, it gets deeper and deeper to a point where he has to physically get into the wall and his feet are probably hanging out the end. I'm guessing he just had to make sure that the lights were out. Because I feel like you can't get away with this today. Maybe prisons have learned since the Shawshank Redemption. Because there's security cameras. A security camera definitely would have caught him. I also saw people online getting confused as to how Andy carved through the wall and then the picture was still over the hole. We see him carving because the picture is hung from a tack above the hole. He slid underneath it. We saw him carve the hole like that. Why are people confused? Why is this a hot butt issue for this movie? So we later see that Andy has skipped town with basically all the money that he earned from the warden from working over 20 years. And then in another badass move from Andy is that he also turned in the Shawshank Prison and the warden for their money laundering scheme and also their mistreatment. We also then see the warden open up a Bible where there is a message left by Andy, and the Bible pages are cut into a shape of an axe. And I should also mention that the verse on which the axe was left in was the verse Exodus, which is a story about Hebrew people escaping from Israel, which is a story about Hebrew people escaping slavery from Egypt. There is definitely a method to Andy's madness. So we see Officer Hadley get arrested. Can you imagine he gets arrested and then he's just sent to Shawshank Prison? Bro's gonna get his ass beat. So before the warden can get arrested, he loads the gun on himself and then takes his own life. So for the rest of the movie, we basically see what happens after Andy escapes prison. He sends a postcard to Red, basically telling him what he's been up to and how he's in Mexico now, which is where, of course, they've always wanted to be, as Red misses him. So we finally see Red's final parole hearing, where he finally drops the act and says that he does not think that he changed because he regrets what he did every day for his entire life since he got arrested. And that, my friends, is how he gets off. That is how he gets on parole.
So you go on and stamp your form, Sonny, and stop wasting my time. Because to tell you the truth, I don't give a shit.
And I really shouldn't laugh, but Family Guy made a freaking joke about this scene, and it was perfect.
Rehabilitated? It's just a stupid made-up word. So boys like you can sit behind a desk, wear a fancy suit, and feel important. You're a jerk. And I had sex with your mother last night. And I swear to God, you let me out of here, first thing I'm gonna do is kill again.
So Red is now a free man. And he basically kind of almost has the same fate as Brooks, unfortunately, at one point. where he works at a grocery store and he stays in the same exact apartment building that Brooks stayed in. And he was even starting to feel the same way that Brooks felt at one point. But he remembered the promise that he made to Andy. So he goes to that place in Maine that he promised Andy he would go to. And basically it was just a bunch of money and how he could travel to Mexico to visit him.
I will be hoping that this letter finds you, and finds you well. Your friend, Andy.
Now that is confidence, my friend. The fact that he told Red to go to a certain spot that he, never even left yet. The time when he told him about the spot, he didn't even write that letter yet. That is confidence. So the next scene is also very special, because we see that Red is packing up to go visit Andy in Mexico, but before he leaves, he also carves on the wall next to Brooks was here, he writes, "So is Red." So Red breaks his parole by going to Mexico to visit Andy, hoping that he would see him, and luckily he does. I heard that this movie was initially going to end before they even got to meet up because the writers thought it would be way too cheesy, but they wanted to have some conclusion. So now that I went through the entirety of the movie, I want to kind of go over what I thought the movie would be like versus what actually happened and how it surprised me. Okay, first thing I want to talk about is the character Red. He was so much more different than I initially thought. For starters, I didn't even know that he was going to be the narrator. That was a surprise to me too. But that brings me to his purpose. I definitely thought the entire concept of the movie was going to be about Red, who was kind of an older man who's been locked up for a while. He was kind of supposed to be the wise man of the group. Mainly because he's played by Morgan Freeman, who always plays those type of characters. But seeing him as almost the standoffish, older man who's also just trying to learn the rest of them, he's the one who actually learns the lesson. I was initially surprised because I thought that Red was supposed to be the one who was supposed to be learning the lesson from Morgan Freeman's character. But no. I thought that Morgan Freeman's character was supposed to be the one to encourage Andy to escape. That was my initial thought in the beginning. Another thing is that I thought that race would play a much bigger part in this movie than it actually did. I honestly thought that every single time they showed one of Red's parole hearings. I thought the main reason he wasn't getting on parole was because of the color of his skin. Mainly, of course, because it took place in the 1940s. And I initially thought that he was supposed to be innocent as well and got falsely acclaimed because of his race, thus forming a bond with Andy because of that. But I was wrong on all accounts. Or I also thought that one of them would die. I mostly thought that Red was going to die. And I also thought that Red's narration was going to go somewhere. I thought it was maybe going to be him reading the diary on his deathbed or something, or I thought the whole thing was actually supposed to be Andy reading from Red's diary because this movie takes place after he already died, and this was Red's diary of him writing out everything that happened beforehand. And this is Andy kind of reading it after he died. Now, let's forget all that, okay? Because that's just my random quirks and opinions. Let's just talk about the overall question. Does this movie deserve to be the title of the greatest movie ever, next to The Godfather? Well, surprising enough, this movie actually was a big box office flop. And it basically only became famous because of reruns. The main reason was a flop, though, of course, wasn't because people thought it was bad. It's just because no one literally saw it because apparently the freaking advertising for this movie sucked. Now, I have a small question about the motive or the message of this movie. I know the whole main message was about having hope, and that's obviously very, very clear in the entirety of the movie. But my question is, what did Hope really do for all of them? Like, I do understand that hope is like a state of mind, and that was mainly just kind of like a form of comfort for Andy. But when you just think about hope in general, nothing really accomplished much from it. Like, Andy was hoping and hoping and hoping that he would be released from prison because of, Tommy's testimonies, because people will figure it out. He was hoping for so many years, so that's what he kept trying to, do good in the prison and all that kind of stuff. But again, Hope didn't do anything for that. He did it himself. I guess maybe the only thing we could argue about that is that he was hoping that he wouldn't get caught. But again, that wasn't really 100% specified. Because again, he's the one who broke out of prison. He did that himself. It wasn't because he hoped and he prayed that he would get released. He wasn't going to get released. In fact, everything was getting worse for him. And then even the same thing with Red. Because, it was at the time where Red completely gave up hope. He completely was like, I'm done with this. I do not want anything to do with this anymore. I'm done. So he completely was like, you know what? At his last parole hearing, he was like, I do not care what happens to me. I really do not care anymore. He gave up hope. But then he got approved. Look, I know I'm probably thinking about this all wrong, and I know people are going to argue with me about this, but and again, I'm probably wrong. That was just my first impression watching it. I was like, Hope didn't really get him anywhere. What? I'm confused by that. This is my only real critique with the movie. Nothing much to say after that. Now, it does have very great characters, even if those characters were really vile and evil. The friendship between Andy and Red was very wholesome. More wholesome than I kind of expected, because I didn't really know how it was going to go. It was almost like an enemies to friends sort of vibe at first. It definitely kind of reminds me of Elphaba and Glinda from Wicked. And honestly, some people probably might disagree with me on this, but I think the pacing for this film was actually pretty good. It really gets you hooked. I love how the first scene in the movie was when Andy gets convicted over 2 life sentences, which is freaking nuts. You almost can feel your heart drop in the first scene, so that really sets the mood for the movie. And some people might say that they think that Morgan Freeman's narration was a little bit repetitive in the movie, but honestly, his voice is very soothing. That man has a talent for talking. I could listen to it all day. And honestly, I won't lie, for an R-rated movie, yes, it was very adult-themed, as an R-rated movie is, but it wasn't as hard to understand as I initially thought. I thought since it was an R-rated movie, it was going to be, very complicated, very, too much going on, way too whatever. But it really wasn't. The only real reason it was rated R is because of, the language, the assaulting, just stuff like that initially. But yeah. So definitely because of that, I do understand why it's rated R. But again, it isn't complicated. It's not a complicated movie to understand or grasp. It's a simple premise. And I think the music is another thing that definitely needs to be applauded for this movie, as well as the acting. You can really feel what the characters were putting off. Except Andy, played by Tim Robbins. His expressions were hard to read, but that was the whole purpose of Andy's character. His character was supposed to look really shy, really reserved, which is the whole reason why he got convicted 2 life sentences to begin with, because the judge thought that he was just so remorseful, so unforgiving, so cold, when really he wasn't. He just was a shy guy, and he just didn't have much emotion. And yes, the movie was definitely sad, of course, but it wasn't over traumatizingly sad, if that makes sense, like some movies are. Yeah. Overall, drumroll, I do understand why this movie is counted as the best movie ever. And of course, I watched it very late, but I do bet that if I watched this when it first came out in the theaters, I would have been completely mesmerized by it. If I heard nothing about it, if I haven't heard other people's opinions, it was just me, my own self, watching it in the theaters, I definitely would understand why it's the best movie ever. And again, almost 30 years later, and it's still the #1 spot on IMDb, which is the only reason why I even know about this movie, is people just keep talking about it, which is amazing. 30 years later, still going strong. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this really random video. I guess it's mostly just kind of a movie promotion, review thing. So if you guys are kind of my age or younger, whatever, and you guys want to watch an absolute classic, definitely check out The Shawshank Redemption, a very good movie, and you can finally tell your parents that you've seen a classic, and they would be so proud of you. Anyway, thanks for watching. I guess I'll see you in the next one. Ow. I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye.